Every Saturday and Sunday, through gates like this one at naval air stations all over the United States, come weekend warriors, pilots and enlisted men of Naval Air Reserve Training Units, NARTU. Based on a regular fleet station, these reserves operate with and alongside regular fleet units. Many of these men are veterans of World War II and Korea, determined to maintain and improve their combat readiness and be immediately available to their country in case of any emergency. Others are of school age, learning skills which will enable them to get ahead faster when they are called into the branch of the Navy in which they're most interested. Headquarters of NARTU Jacksonville is in these buildings. Here, too, are the shops and classrooms where the reserves continue their training as pilots of carrier and patrol planes. Electronics men for radio and radar equipments, ordnance men to check out the guns, bombs, and mines, metalsmiths for the maintenance of the aircraft, mechanics, any one of the many skills necessary to keep a squadron in the air. NARTU Jacksonville is one of the 28 Naval Air Reserve stations located in the United States. Naval Air Reserves on active duty and regular Navy officers maintain the reserve planes, conduct technical and operational training, and work with a continual flow of both trained veterans and recruits. All are held to a high peak of technical, operational, and military standards. Station keeper reserves, both Marine and Navy, could provide some 10,000 additional men ready to go into the fleet on short notice. A typical Naval Air Reserve training unit like the one at Jacksonville is composed of fighter squadrons, anti-submarine squadrons, service and transport squadrons, and marine fighter and air control squadrons. There are also auxiliary air and ground units in outlying areas supported by the parent activity. Every reserve is paid for the time he puts in according to his grade or rate. All are volunteers. The only penalty for failing to attend drills is to be dropped from the program. In addition, all reserves earn points toward retirement pay according to the Navy retirement system. High point of each year for the Naval Air Reserves is the 2 weeks of active duty training, duty which is usually spent at a United States base training in fundamentals.
On Capitol Hill this morning, the president told newsmen, quote, "Our armed forces must regain maximum mobility of action. Our strategic reserves must be centrally placed and readily deployable to meet sudden aggression against ourselves and our allies. Our defense must rest on trained manpower."
From this message came a renewed interest in ready reserves and the idea of using a reserve squadron for an advanced-based training exercise. The commanders of the Reserve Air Wing and Patrol Squadron 741 discussed the idea and found it feasible mainly because VP-741 was a unique reserve squadron. Many of its members had not only served in World War II, but the squadron as a unit had been recalled to active duty for the Korean conflict and had operated P-2V Neptunes with the fleet from Malta. Most of the men had been off active duty less than 12 months. Here, therefore, were the ingredients of a truly ready reserve squadron. A hard core of seasoned veterans, recently fleet qualified in type and high in morale. They were considered ready for continued fleet employment on their annual exercise. What could be more realistic or better training for the new men in the squadron than to conduct their redeployment back to Malta in fleet lines, just as it might be done in case of emergency? Final decision was to do an advanced base operation involving a transatlantic trip. This was to be the route. It was to be a demonstration of a reserve squadron's ability to deploy rapidly for overseas operations. The maximum degree of self-sufficiency in operations and maintenance would be accomplished. The squadron would operate for 2 weeks on its own, with only consumable supplies such as gas, oil, ammunition, and food to be provided. It would conduct exercises with the 6th Fleet or other units in the Mediterranean. The high point would be a defensive mining exercise in the Aegean Sea. The squadron would also use their training period for area familiarization in Europe. An additional problem was that the cruise would have to be accomplished at no extra expense to the government over the normal pay and allowances for the 2-week training period Living expenses would have to be paid by the men themselves. Advanced base operations require both aviation and non-aviation personnel. A reserve CB was requested for the crews for technical advice. The op order, the general concept, is prepared by Captain Coonahan with the staff doing the supporting planning. The whole operation annex, the supply plan, the intelligence plan, the navigation and operation plan, and the ordnance plan is a job for the wing staff and the squadron. Permission to conduct this mobilization training exercise is requested from the Chief of Naval Operations. While the request is going through the chain of command, the old squadron steps up its training. All the men are eager to go, eager to get away from their civilian jobs for 2 weeks. Jobs which run the gamut of American industry. Commander Goodwin Taylor left his construction company. Lieutenant Mark Halsey, Jr. closed his law books. Chief Aviation Electrician Clarence Moore put away his light meter repairman's tools. Commander Charles Rogers, a Jacksonville real estate man, forgot deeds and leases and resumed command of VP-741. Aviation Machinist First Class Woodfin Wester left his motorcycle behind. Dr. Ferguson, medico of VP-741, took steps to get away from his practice for 2 weeks' duty with his old shipmates. Lieutenant Commander Stanley Julian took a breather from selling used cars. A father and son team came along, too. Aviation mechanic Jim McClellan and his son, Airman Jim McClellan, Jr., a high school senior, each packed his sea bag. Now comes the news that the request for the transatlantic cruise is approved. The importance of this type of training is recognized. With only a short time before departure, the shakedown period must be intense. No Air Reserve unit had ever flown across the Atlantic on fleet duty in peacetime. For such a transatlantic hop, 100% of operational readiness had to be achieved. This would be no time to be caught unprepared. First, a trip to the Lockheed plant in California, where the P-2Vs were made, for a complete briefing on recommended operating techniques. Then the full treatment from the engineering, technical, and test personnel. Patrol Squadron VP-741 personnel came away knowing the latest P-2V techniques and the probable trouble spots. But as a double check, a Lockheed field representative will go with the crews. The fleet helps, too. All facilities for pilot and crew checkout are made available, and extra instructors and check crews are provided for operational readiness inspection. All hands are briefed in newest methods during the build-up period. Long hours of voluntary preparation outside of required drills are called for, at least 100 hours per crew. The planes are flown on long navigation flights, instrument hops, gunnery and rocket hops, anti-submarine exercises, and finally, mining. Meanwhile, the mechanic classes are going on. The ordnancemen are getting their checkouts, too. More radiomen are needed who can operate all the equipment, radar, radio, anti-submarine equipment, and in such short time, that means volunteer night classes. The navigators work out in the classroom and in the air, too, and of course there are the tactical formations and emergency procedures to be learned. Briefing in all phases of operation must be continually conducted. And finally, the squadron must be able to pass a regular fleet operational readiness inspection, since it'll be moving under fleet control. As the deadline comes closer and closer, squadron reserve engineering personnel are brought aboard early to assist the reserve station keepers in preparing the aircraft. Critical spare parts are collected, inventoried, and boxed for air transport. Now comes the big day, 24 July, 1954. Wives and families of the crew and many dignitaries are present to see the outfit off. The chaplain asks God's blessing on the venture and a safe return. Captain Jimmy Thatch, Admiral Gowrie, and Admiral Doyle, top naval airmen in World War II, wish the squadron well. For this is a peaceful mission to our allies and friends. A mission made with the hope that never again will this squadron have to be deployed in anger. Practice for action, but pray for peace is the motto. The mayor of Jacksonville suggests that Patrol Squadron 741, VP-741, be called VIP-741 from now on, because in his opinion, they are very important people. The stakes are high. Free people everywhere may someday depend on our ability to deploy reserves for their defense. The crews of the 6 P-2Vs and the 4-engine R-5D go aboard. At 1200, the planes take the air. And now, airborne, headed for Europe, just as if there were an actual emergency. A join-up and final salute before departing. One of NATO's own fighter squadrons acts as escort to the coast. Patrol Squadron 741 is on its way. True course, 081 degrees. Some 4.5 hours later, after 882 nautical miles, Kindley Air Force Base, Bermuda. Here the squadron puts down for the night. The weather is humid and mild. A night's rest then, and on to the Azores. True course, 078 degrees. The weather is good, the planes roar on. It's still Sunday when the Azores appear on the horizon. On time and on schedule after 1,909 nautical miles. Another overnight stop, and the Air Force fills the squadron's operational requirements with prompt refueling and servicing as soon as it arrives. In the morning, on to Port Lyautey, French Morocco. Across these beaches, U.S. forces drove forward in 1942 to help push the Axis powers out of North Africa. Now the plane's engines throb over Port Lyautey, our main naval air base in the European-African theater. North Africa, 43 hours after departure from Jax. Again on time, on schedule. The first Neptune touches down. Our naval forces welcome the reserves with open arms. The effect of this new reserve is not missed by our French allies. The ability to project U.S. naval air forces into the probable and vital areas of conflict to maintain our control of the seas and lines of communication strike a sympathetic spot in the hearts of our European allies. They understand the meaning of a ready reserve. The proposed exercises and area familiarization are approved by the United States Navy Commander-in-Chief in Europe. After the greetings and the servicing of the planes, there is a little time for sightseeing. Next morning, the crews are briefed, the planes readied, and off again. Next stop, Portugal, over the waters of Trafalgar, where British sea power saved the British Empire against Napoleon. And on to Lisbon, to repay the visit of the Portuguese naval aviators to Jacksonville last year, when the reserves checked them out in the operations of patrol aircraft sent to Portugal under the Mutual Defense Pact. Greetings in Lisbon are warm. Old friends meet and common ties are reestablished. The Portuguese are old seafaring men and know that their safety and security rests on their sea lines of communication. The reserve anti-submarine and commerce-protecting crews are most welcome as a reminder of America's ability to assist in time of need. While the official reception is going on, the men enjoy a few leisure hours visiting the scenic spots of this capital city, one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. Sailors are the same the world over. Friends are easily made. And, of course, pictures for the girl back home. Portuguese are gracious people. They even take over the security of the aircraft to permit all hands to enjoy a few hours' liberty. And then hearty goodbye to old friends and off to Malta. But a rough running engine on one of the planes spells trouble. The choice is to return to Port Lyautey for assistance or to stop in Gibraltar and make necessary repairs. Since the trouble appears to be with the ignition system, the decision is that it can be repaired at Gibraltar. The P-2V carrying the ignition spares will land and provide the parts needed. The pilot calls Gibraltar for landing instructions and permission is given to land. And so this outpost of British power becomes a safe haven for U.S. aircraft. Without formalities, a British base becomes available to their American friends. Who knows when we'll have to use this base again, as in World War II. A fine welcome from the RAF and offers of assistance. But this is a test of self-sufficiency. Patrol Squadron 741 must get along without outside help. Technicians turn to on the faulty engine, locate the trouble, and in a few hours, the plane is back in tip-top condition. Then back on schedule again. Below, the Mediterranean, one of the vital links in Western lines of communication and defense, shimmers in peaceful quiet. Malta revisited after 2 years. They still remember, and Patrol Squadron 741 still remembers them. Malta is now the squadron's advanced base. The next day, the planes are serviced for the major exercise of this cruise. The British are very interested in this reserve operation. They watch as maintenance crews prepare for the morrow's mission. And in turn, the United States crews get a checkout in British jet anti-submarine aircraft. The British Navy maintains a constant combat readiness in this lonely island in the Mediterranean. And a visit around the island base, and a look at some of the monuments to British tenacity in the last war. The old harbor of Valletta still acts as a base for British sea power. Malta itself is actually a fixed island carrier from which operations in the Mediterranean may be launched during an emergency. The officers are welcomed by Admiral Mountbatten, an old acquaintance of Patrol Squadron 741 when it was deployed to Malta during the Korean conflict. Meanwhile, orders are received. VP-741 is to conduct simulated mining exercises in the Aegean Sea in support of the 6th Fleet. The crews are briefed and wartime security restrictions are applied. This is it. The object of all those hours of preparation, in the classroom and in the check crews, on ordnance exercises, instrument flying, and long overwater navigation. Now it is paying off. Radio silence is maintained as the squadron moves out with listening watches on all equipment. Patrol plane commanders give last-minute instructions to crew members. The exercise area is clear, and then mines away. Pilots report all mines dropped in assigned area and get a well done from the commanding officer. Now the squadron is off for the area familiarization visits arranged through diplomatic channels. 3 planes to Athens to visit our Greek allies, and 3 to Istanbul at the edge of the Iron Curtain to pay a call on our Turkish friends. Istanbul, in its uniquely strategic location, gives Turkey command of the Bosphorus, a major link in the only sea route from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. The next morning, through the courtesy of the Turkish government, the men are given a boat ride up the Bosphorus. Here can be seen the anti-submarine nets guarding this exit and the alert Turkish defenses. Just 1 week out of Jacksonville, and VP-741 is at the outer fringe of the western defenses. Everyone understands Mark Twain's statement now. Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. And also that time spent in reconnaissance is seldom wasted. In Athens, meanwhile, the other crews are getting acquainted with Greek scenes. Much of it is in the product of that golden age that followed the Battle of Salamis, the Greeks' victory over the Persians in the year 480 B.C. And then homeward bound, a little weary and a little tired, but happy in the knowledge that the whole operation has proceeded according to plan. The main points have been proven: readiness, mobility, and self-sufficiency. Naples is a stopover for a day. It's Sunday and everyone is in holiday spirit. Then the planes fly over historic Rome, Marseille, and Paris en route to London. Over the coast of England, where the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserves rendezvous and lead the way. England is a friendly land, with reminders that a few short years ago, U.S. Navy patrol squadrons based in England helped the British win their Battle of the Atlantic. The U.S. Navy Commander-in-Chief in Europe, Admiral Cassidy, welcomes the group. He's an old friend from the time he commanded in Jacksonville and in the 6th Fleet during the last emergency. He congratulates the squadron on a splendid performance unique in the Naval Air Reserve training program. A few days' rest in London after 9 days of intensive operation. Time for both aircraft and crew to prepare for the long flight home. The British are most gracious in their hospitality. Sightseeing, a study of weather maps of the route home. The northern route was the intended way home, but it's rough, bad weather all the way. Safety is a paramount factor. The open southern route is chosen since the flexibility of these patrol planes permits this selection. Patrol Squadron 741 heads for the Azores and a place to land, rest, and prepare for the morrow and North America again. In the morning, on to Argentia. But this field is closed and the planes overfly to Harmon Air Force Base in Stevensville for the next stop. Bases in this forbidding area are so planned that at least one will be open under all conditions. Tomorrow, Washington and Jacksonville in good old USA. Naval Air Reserve fighters intercept and act as escorts over Boston, over New York, over Philadelphia, and finally into Washington, last capital of the four-continent cruise. Vice Admiral Oxley has a welcome for VP-741. The Navy is proud of you, he says. We've followed your trip with great interest. Your cruise is another first in naval aviation. We hope many reserve squadrons will continue operations with the fleet from now on in their annual training duty. After clearing customs, last leg of the cruise, and home. On time, on schedule. Patrol Squadron 741 in 14 days has operated 16,000 miles in 11 countries on 4 continents and was self-sufficient at all times. You have seen the beginning of your new Naval Air Reserve, reserve task forces deployed for fleet duty in peace as in war. Upon reserves like these, the destiny of our country and of our friends everywhere may well depend in days to come. This is your global Naval Air Reserve, dedicated to the cause of peace and devoted to duty so that free people everywhere may rest easier.